Let me share
you're
my
live.
screen.
Perfect. And we have our panel guests on, Bobby, so we should be good to go. So I'm going to say you go ahead and take control and kick it off, and then I'll be ready for the panel discussion and monitor for questions.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Looks perfect.
Awesome. So let's get started. So again, this is Blockchain Employ. It's a Hyperledger event that we try to run every season. It's a 4-part event. The first part we geared towards just an introduction to the blockchain job or career environment. Like, what are the new jobs? What do they look like? How do your skills transfer? And then the second event, we usually gear towards employers. Like, what are their pipelines? What jobs are they going to need to be filled? How quick do they need to fill them? What do these jobs look like? How do you get them? And then tonight is our third event, and it more is geared towards getting yourself ready to get that job. So we have a great panel from Accenture to talk about what they're looking for when they do the interview. We have some hints and some skills to get you all organized and ready to get to the interview. And then finally, we have this great job fair in the beginning of December, where you can actually sit at tables, breakout rooms, and discuss with people who have the jobs, almost like an impromptu interview. Get your foot in the door and maybe get you an actual second interview soon, or even move further up the chain there. So we're going to get started. This is, I think I said it, I just have to grab my screen here. Okay, so this is a Hyperledger event. So we have to display this lovely antitrust policy. Is that working? There we go. So this is just how to behave on this call. If you'll take a minute to read it, it'll be on the screen for a second. Okay. So again, this is the third part in a 4-part series. The last part is on November 2nd. Today is geared towards getting you that job and the things you need to do, the steps you need to take to get there. I am Bobby Mascara. I am from Ledger Academy. I run a project called The Giving Chain, and I'm on the Hyperledger Technical Steering Committee. Is Jim ready to introduce himself?
Sure. Yeah, Jim Mason. And why am I getting an echo? Hold on. Yeah, so Jim Mason, I work with Hyperledger for 5 years now. Have been in a variety of roles, fabric documentation, have worked as the leader of the Hyperledger Public Sector Group, and also the leader of the Hyperledger Boston Meetup as well, and have basically been working in the blockchain space on delivering different types of solutions for a variety of companies. And that's my background.
And then we have John.
Yeah, thanks, Bobby. I'm John Carpenter. I run the Global Blockchain Summit. I'm also the co-chair of the Learning Materials Working Group with Bobby. And right now I'm working on updating the university curriculum that is published by Hyperledger. I run the Denver Meetup group as well, and been involved in the blockchain space now for a number of years.
Thank you, John. So this is some announcement that we start off with for the community. This is just general things that are going on. So the job fair is December 2nd. It will be with the people who have the jobs, and you'll sit down and you'll chat with them. So that's a must come to event. These are meetup events. So there's, just like our meetup group, there's meetups internationally and globally. Here are some of the events that are happening. That one is happening Saturday in India. Then there's a Budapest one, a Tokyo. And then again, the Budapests are very active meetup group because they have even a third one coming up. Frankfurt has one, and then again, Tokyo, and then again, Budapest. So these are just some opportunities for you to sit in and listen to what's going on in these calls, maybe ask some questions and get involved in those communities. Next up, we have an event happening in the telecom group, which is focused on doing or looking at solutions for blockchain in the telecom space, and that can take on a whole lot of forms. This particular one is talking about getting some non-programming languages into DLT, so it makes it easier for the roaming agreements to be enforced. So if you're at all interested in telecom or worked in telecom and you want to see how blockchain is coming up with solutions for that sector, please sit in on that call. The link is there and it's on the Hyperledger wiki page, which will put this whole presentation on the website when we're done, so you can just grab it down. Then also we have the identity working group. They're trying to get more people involved in these solutions. So they're hosting kind of like an open house, I guess, for Aries and Indy. So if you've ever been curious about how identity is managed on the blockchain and the new ways that that's going to look, please go to those events. They're January and February. Again, the links are on the Hyperledger websites. This is a new view of the Hyperledger product line and solutions, and they are clickable. Follow the link on the screen there, and you can click on any of these cards. It'll give you facts, history, anything you want to know about these projects is on those cards. So please look at that. It's kind of a revamped greenhouse for us. We're like moving out into a landscape view. And then again, in Hyperledger, I'm having a little holiday party in my little metaverse land where we're just going to go over new projects. If you have an idea that you would like to showcase, please let me know and we'll give you a booth on the Christmas, or not Christmas, I'm sorry, excuse me, holiday event. And then this is another thing that's happening December 16th in Boston. This gentleman's book is out. It's well read and well accepted in the community. And he's discussing it at a Boston Meetup. So that's the link for that. And then there's the Women in Tech Meetup. They're meeting to do a virtual networking on November 30th. And there's a link for that as well. And just a little update on the giving chain. We wrapped up the mentorship program on Wednesday. Hardik Gupta, my mentee, gave a presentation. It was a live working demo using Firefly, where we collect the donations and transfer them to NFTs. And that's how we transfer them through the giving chain. Again, it was fantastic experience working with mentees and seeing how all these young kids are so excited about this technology and the things they want to do. We just not only had the mentee that was from Hyperledger, but other people just donated their time like they did when we started this project 2 years ago. And it was a fantastic result. So I thank all of the people who were helping out with that. And then, okay, so now we're going to get started. I'm just going to talk just a few more minutes. I promise I won't take up too much of your time, just to talk about how to get ready for what's happening in our next section, which is discussing what the interview process looks like and what the people with the jobs are looking for when you are face-to-face or having discussions with them. So the initial discussion is just going to be about how to get prepared. What do you have to do to get ready? So again, you really have to stop and ask yourself some questions when you're looking for a career in blockchain. So why are you changing careers? Why are you interested in moving into blockchain? What's your motivation? And if you've decided to actually make that move, you have to kind of like sell yourself. It's now an online market where things have changed. It's not the personal interview anymore. It's definitely a Zoom room interview that you're going to have initially. So ask yourself the questions. What are you looking for in a new career? What are your motivators? Are you motivated because you can't stand the job you're in? Are you motivated because you are just so hooked on the technology that you can't really think or focus on anything else but learning more about it? Do you want a remote career because you've had an in-person job forever and you don't want to go into the office and deal with traffic anymore? Because remote jobs now are just as easy to get as in-person ones were. So is that something that would be interesting you in this career shift that you're making? What makes you unique? Like, how can you sell yourself for these positions? What's your special spark and why What's your story? What happened to you? And, why are you extraordinary? Because everybody's extraordinary. You just have to market yourself, right? And what have you accomplished? Not so much if you're just getting out of school, but a lot of people are transferring into these fields because it's like the wild, wild west for jobs. New solutions are being created and jobs have to follow through the solution. So, what have you done? How have you worked hard in other areas, not necessarily blockchain, but in other areas that make you stand out? So you do have to sell yourself, and you need a personal brand, because people aren't anymore meeting you and getting to know you over a cup of coffee or an interview face to face. They're going to a prospective job candidate should expect their social media to be looked at by these people interviewing them and going to offer you positions, because that's how the world is today. So social media, you got to ask yourself, how do you see yourself? What do you think your social media looks like? And then really look at yourself and say, what do other people see? It's always interesting when you go to somebody else's computer and log in, or use their login with them there, of course, and Google yourself from someone else's point of view. If you've never done it, you'd be surprised what comes up. So it's how other people see you too. And at some point, these are going to overlap. And that's where you find your personal brand, is somewhere in the middle. So it's what you want to present, and then what people are actually going to take away from that. So, okay, so now we know we have to sell ourselves. We have to get ourselves all our plan in a row for what we want to accomplish. What kind of job do we want? And does our social media and our backing up information reflect that? So let's see how we can get that done. So I'm very organized. And when I look for jobs or do anything, I organize myself. I have a personal wiki page, which is something, it's just like getting a calendar or a Zoom account. So I can store myself and get at it from any computer, no matter where I am. What I'm going to show you now also works in a Google Drive or in just your Windows basic directory, just to get organized. So start a file that's called job search, opportunity search, career change, whatever you want, and put it on your desktop. It should have a couple of folders in it. One would be resume, where you keep all your resumes, iterations of them, because they change. They should change weekly. If you're really looking for a job, you should be trying to get things on there that you're involved in. References, cover letters, LinkedIn's, websites you control, your bio, your other information if you have a CV, leads. Have you heard of jobs? You don't want to lose, or you're reading an article, you don't want to lose something that interests you or piques your interest, because that's how, especially in such a new industry, that if you find yourself interested in something and you can pursue that, you will be recognized among the people who are also pursuing these new fields. So that's one way, is to keep a list of your leads. And then resources. My resource page has a lot of YouTube videos from these events. They get recorded, and then I take the link from the YouTube video, so that if I'm filling something out, I have all my links, all my online YouTube videos, or if I, have another video somewhere else, I keep all my press clippings, so to speak. And there's not many of them, trust me. But the ones I have, I like to keep organized there. And this is the best way, again, to keep things on track for when you're moving forward, so that when you actually find a job that you want to apply for, these things are done and they're not overwhelming for you. So your resume, if you haven't been in the job market for a really long time, you don't have to do a standard resume. You can do what they call a functional resume, which sums up more of what you're experienced in your life. What have you accomplished that makes you special? And so you don't have to worry if there's huge gaps in your employment. What did you accomplish in those times? Kind of selling yourself more on accomplishments than your educational credentials. Then there's the big one, is your LinkedIn profile. This is very important. People will look in business at your LinkedIn profile. It should be bright. It should be cheery. It shouldn't be depressing. It shows that you're able to add pictures, you're able to summarize yourself, try to sell yourself. I won an award a year and a half ago. I put that picture up there, and I'm up for a Mentee Global Award this year. You got to vote for me, so that's up there too. So I'm not only advertising myself, I'm trying to get an action item out of you as well. You always should list your most visible achievement first, the one you want people to see, the one that holds the most clout. So I'm on the technical steering committee of Hyperledger. I put that up there first because that's pretty impressive, rather than, nobody's heard of the giving chain yet. So that's second, but it's more important in my heart. But, so you have to use this as, again, what you want to portray, not what you think you have there. You have to, from the outside world looking in at you. And then next, references and cover letters. Key thing here is keep a file of templates. So if you are even slightly thinking about changing careers, you should start a file for templates for, let me see if I can click this, references. So when you're dealing with someone, like after this, I'll say, John, I have this blank template for a reference for myself. Could you just fill it out and like maybe add a comment about it? I'd really appreciate it. So you're asking someone to do something for you, but you're not making it too difficult. They don't have to create the reference letter. You just give them a blank form letter and they'll fill in the paragraphs and make you shine in the letter. But don't make it hard for them to have to start from scratch. Send them a template. And then when you get that information back, actively keep a file for all your references so that when, again, you actually do go to apply for a job, attaching references is a piece of cake. It's not something that you have to look for. So every project that you work on, if you have someone who you've worked with on your team that you thought you did a good job, send them that letter and get it in your file. It's always good to have something like that. And don't be afraid to ask people for letters. People like to have their opinion shared. So, make it look like a win-win. And then the next thing is cover letters. Now, I use cover letters differently than most people. So I have the templates for the cover letters. I picked one or two that I like. And when I go to apply for a job, I customize the cover letter. And then I save that cover letter under that folder with the name of the company that I applied to. And every time some communication comes in, whether it's a rejection letter, whether it's a next step letter, or we need more information, I keep a running tab of communications on that cover letter so that I know instantly where I am. Because if you're applying for more than 2 or 3 jobs at a time, it gets confusing. Who sent what? Where did it go? So I like to keep track of the job on the cover letter. And then I just save it as a living Word document that just keeps getting added to. So I can just go look at the tail of the tape and see what communications I've had with this company. How long did it take them to react to me? Was it right away? Am I moving quick? So that's a really good place to store information about what's going on. And then here's the real hard one, knowing what to do with social media. There are so many now ways to express yourself on social media, and it's hard to keep up with them. I know Hyperledger is having a working group set up just to figure out how to handle social media because it's just gone crazy. If you are dealing with NFTs or any kind of community that deals with NFTs, you must have Twitter and Discord. That's the only way they communicate, and they communicate often. And it's not just Discord or Twitter. They talk to each other. In order to get points on Discord, you have to post something on Twitter. So now they're crossing over. I kind of think of Facebook. I think I actually have. Yeah, Facebook is more for social networking with your family. That's where you put the family vacation pictures. I don't try to tie my Facebook account with any other account. That's kind of separate. So I know when everyone's birthday is. Twitter is more for blasting out a thought. You can tweet. We all know it can get you in trouble. So I stay away from tweeting. Instagram is photo sharing and moment sharing. It is more of, I guess, not so much business, but more social. But a lot of people do advertise their businesses and have Instagram accounts, and you can follow their Instagram accounts. And then again, we talked a little bit about Discord. We can share pictures, texts, you can build communities. There's a whole lot going on in Discord. And I think that's going to become more popular as the NFT market becomes more popular. So basically, next is just sitting down and deciding, where do you want to work? Like, do you want to work? Like, what do you want to do and where do you want to work? Do you want to work at a startup, because there's a lot of those in this industry? Or do you want a company that's vetted already and been around for a while, and like a corporate life with benefits and all those kind of perks that come with a nice, reliable company? And what kind of job do you want in this new industry? There's developers, managers, architects, consultants. There's just so many new jobs now. Community lead for NFT communities is huge. Artists, and there's just too many careers to list. Project managers, tech writers, anything that you have done can be applied into this new industry as it's building from the ground up. And then basically education. That's how I got my foot in the door. It's how I suggest everybody get their foot in the door. And with the internet, all of these classes listed here are auditable, meaning you don't have to pay a dime to sit and read the entire curriculum. If you want the certificate, you pay for the exam. But the information is there, and you can map the jobs directly to some of the classes. Obviously, if you want to be a blockchain developer, you take the blockchain developers course. So there's so much information just for you to grab and learn. And it's great to say, I took the blockchain developers program and you list when you took the class, because it's verifiable now. So you have to be honest about that. But so this is one way to do it. And also, when you're looking for a job, if you kind of know the company you want to work for, go to their website. Accenture is coming to talk to us today. And if you're interested in jobs at Accenture, they have a newsletter, they have a career site, they have an education site. Get your name out there, see your name on the newsletter, make some comments when people ask for your input. It's a great place to start getting involved and getting your name out there. So with that, the only other thing is community. Blockchain is about community. It is not a single sport. It is a team sport. You must build a community around these projects, and that's done by working groups and special interest groups. So most companies, I know Consensus, the Government Blockchain Association, Hyperledger, all have working groups dealing with different areas. So working groups basically focus on a technology. Hyperledger has a smart contract working group. It has the learning materials working group. We're focused on those things. Whereas the special interest groups are more sector dedicated. So there's a public sector, which deal with public sector issues. So when government and society come together, how does that look with blockchain solutions? There's a social impact. That's where the Giving Chain got its start, was through the social impact special interest group. And we saw before the telecom, they're having a special interest group. There's an identity working group. So again, each one of these companies has working groups you can get involved in where they just want your input, maybe help out writing a white paper or just maintaining a wiki page or a website. So there's a lot for people to do, even if they don't know how to code a blockchain or spin one up, it's fine. There's so many careers. So the interview, there's just a few points. The only one that really matters is that you're on time. If you're late for an interview, don't even bother. You have to be on time. You have to be professional. You have to know if this environment and culture is what you want. If you want a culture where remote work is what they are promoting and they don't have an office, and you want to work in an office, that's not a job for you. Know the job description, which I'm sure Jim will mention in a little while. That's kind of confusing sometimes, but there's good clues in there as to what you'll be doing. And practice your interviews questions. Have your sister, your brother, your mom, your girlfriend, your dog ask you the questions and actually start and finish answering them. And you'll wind up getting further organization in your answers if you try that out. And prepare examples of your work. So when they're going to say, what have you been up to? Have talking points, 4 or 5. I always use the IDEA approach, which is I state my case, I develop it, I give you an example, and then the rest is evaluation and quizzes. But you have to start by telling everyone what you're going to be talking about, and then tell them the specific talking points. And that's better if you have it organized in your head. And then ask questions of the interview. Here's a really good question when they say, do you have any questions of me? You can say, what does a typical day for someone in this position look like? That's a great question. And it shows that you're really interested. I, again, can't tell you enough to research the position and the company's culture. Like what are the goals of the company, and do they align with your goals? So now I'm done with my little spiel about what you should do to get yourself ready for the interview. I'll be around for questions after the panel, and I'm going to turn it over to John, and he's going to discuss some questions with the panelists. They'll introduce themselves first, and it's all yours, John.
Great, Bobby. Thank you very much. And it's always a pleasure to see your wonderful presentations. Perfect information for any candidates looking for jobs in the blockchain space. Really appreciate that. So today we have the great pleasure of having two people from Accenture, as well as Jim Mason from Paramount join us today. So I'll just kick it off with just a short overview, and then maybe they can give a detailed description of their role. So we have Jennifer Dutchman, and she's a technology recruiting specialist with Accenture, and she has over 8 years of recruiting in technology. She's based out of Dallas, and she kind of supports 3 groups within Accenture. That is the Tech Innovation Group, including blockchain, Industry X, and then Global Cloud First. Then we also have Michael Sperber, and he's a talent acquisition lead at Accenture, and he's got over 11 years experience with Accenture, based out of Tampa, Florida, and he supports the same groups, the Tech Innovation Group, which includes the blockchain practice, Industry X, and Global Cloud First. And then also joining our panel, we have Jim Mason, and he's a blockchain expert with Paramount Software, and he's had a lot of years of experience using Hyperledger Fabric, and he's also done a lot of great, interesting public sector projects. So thanks to all of you for joining today. So at this point, I'm just going to start with Jennifer, and maybe you can give us a little more background and insight as to kind of what your role is with Accenture.
Sure. I am a technology recruiting specialist with Accenture. And in terms of my role, I work with our business stakeholders in terms of their hiring needs, supporting them on posting their roles and job descriptions, and also monitoring the applicant pool, doing the screening process, and then with qualified applicants, continuing their interview process through the Accenture interview process to hire. So it's basically from start to finish on a particular position that I may be supporting for one of our business stakeholders.
Perfect. And then Michael, can you also give us a little bit of more background on your role as well?
Sure, absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Sperber. I'm one of our talent acquisition leads here at Accenture, focused on our technology business, of course. I know that John shared some of the stakeholders that are primary stakeholders, but my focus is leading a recruiting team that focuses on certain technology skills, building relationships with those business groups, making sure that we're helping them with all of their recruiting needs, and we build our relationships with our HR leaders as well, always focused on our entire talent supply, a complete overview of our talent supply function, making sure that we're looking at our resources holistically, not just from a recruiting perspective. And again, I've been with Accenture for 11 plus years now, and nice to meet everyone.
Great, thanks, Michael. Appreciate having you. Jim, you also want to give a little bit of overview as to your role with Paramount and what you're doing in the blockchain space?
Yeah, so I've worked with many companies in many roles, most of them outside of blockchain. And so and also for quite a long number of years. So the world for me has changed a lot from when I started professionally to where I am now, in terms of how companies operate, how HR operates, how roles are defined, and so on. The one thing that is consistent, I'll say, it has nothing to do with blockchain, is just the fact that if you wind up in a role with a company that's a good company, what's going to happen is their benefits may vary company to company, the size will be different and those things, but you'll know that you have not just an HR department, but more importantly, you'll be on a team with a manager you report to that's going to give you what I call good career guidance throughout your time at that company. And when I look back, that's probably been the biggest thing. I mean, it's great that HR is doing a Class A job for you on their end based on whatever the company can provide. But to me, most of the value that I got out of a business and most of the growth I had everything to do with the team I was on and everything to do with the manager I was on and how we all communicated well on both sides. So it's not just how they communicated to me, but how I shared my concepts, my ideas back with them. And so when that worked well, it went great. And when it doesn't, you have to try to figure out ways to address it and improve the communication for your team and maybe your manager or whoever else you may report to. So, and I will say, I tell my grandkids this, the two biggest words in the dictionary, the rest are just sort of there for fluff. They're nice. They mean something. But the two most important ones are expectations and consequences. And if you can look at all the relationships you have, including what you're trying to accomplish in your own life, and figure out how to set expectations well and communicate those and understand the consequences in all those relationships, you'll be very successful, basically.
Perfect. Yeah, Jim, that's great advice and great understanding. So what I'd like to do here is really have this be a good free-flowing discussion. So I have some preliminary questions that I want to go through with the panel. But what I'd also like to encourage is everyone who's in attendance, feel free to post questions in the chat. And as they fit in and are appropriate to the panel discussion, we'll bring them up as we go along. And so what I'd like to do now is really cut over and talk about something that I think Jennifer touched on in her introduction. And since this event's all about the candidates, and we've already had a couple of events that really have gone and showed, what the wealth of opportunity coming from the companies is, and, really what it looks like to be recruited in the space. This time, I really want to focus on how the candidate process works, what the candidates need to be aware of, and how they position themselves when applying for positions. And so I'm going to run through a series of questions, but then also any of the panel members want to bring up anything specific that they think would be relevant to really educating the people in attendance, feel free to do so. So Jennifer, I'm going to start with you. And you had talked about the screening process at Accenture. So maybe can you go in a little bit more detail here to give an expectation for anyone on the meeting call today, what the Accenture screening process looks like?
Sure, absolutely. So in looking at an applicant that has applied, generally there is thought before the job is posted in terms of what the specific requirements are or the minimum requirements for a particular position. So when looking at applying for a job and a role at Accenture, it is important to take the time investment to take a look at what role you are applying for. Do you meet the particular requirements that are posted? And then once I have an applicant that meets the requirements, then I will spend about 30 minutes with that individual, doing some introductions, giving an introduction of Accenture, as well as going through a process of their background and experience, why they're interested in Accenture. And if that individual meets the requirements, then I would move them forward to an interview with a member of the hiring team as the next step.
Perfect. And Michael, is there any other specific things related to the screening process that you want to surface as far as how Accenture handles it?
No, I think Jen did a great job. And by the way,
You did.
I'd like to compliment Bobby as well. Uh, Bobby, you answered many of these questions. You did an exceptional job in your initial overview. I think we need to hire you as a recruiter.
Thank you so much. I'll send you my resume and you have my LinkedIn profile in the chat.
And
Yes,
again,
no,
Jen, your
I
answer was
agree. Bobby is very talented and an exceptional collaborator. So anything that you can do to work with Bobby, you're in great shape, Michael. Okay, back over to you to kind of weigh in a little bit more on the screening process. Anything specific you want to add beyond the great coverage that Jennifer did?
No, I mean, that's that initial conversation with the candidates. Where a lot of the things Jen and Bobby touched on, where we really want to understand where we're looking for excellent communication skills, the motivation of the candidate, the type of environment they're looking to work in, because here at Accenture, the types of candidates that we're really looking for are people that work well in a team environment, that they're able to work on project teams and they're able to collaborate. So there are questions that we ask in that screening interview to try to get a sense for that. We want to definitely see that the candidate has prepared for that initial conversation with our recruiters, that they understand the role that we're discussing with them. And certainly that that they're motivated and driven by an interest in working for Accenture. They've thought this through and that they're motivated. So just a couple of other things.
Yeah, no, that's perfect, Michael. And I think those are great insights and are really going to, cover a lot of the additional questions that I'm going to have for the panel. So Jim, from your perspective, how does Paramount view the screening process, and maybe yourself? I know you've done a lot of recruiting and looking for talent. What do you see as the main screening process?
So, well, it's very different. It depends on, one, the company, two, who's doing the hiring, what the role is. I think all those factors play into it. So smaller companies certainly tend to be less formal. It doesn't mean they don't have a process, they do. But having been through large company processes, IBM, Fidelity, Citizens Bank, big companies like Accenture, they have a very well-defined process. Usually I'll say lots more steps than the average small company does, or certainly a startup. So I've had at the startup level, and I've been in a couple of those, there may not even be an HR department, honestly. So you're talking to somebody who's a hiring manager, in some case, on a conversation. And those things are very hard to predict, harder than the weather in New England to predict. So I can tell you, I've had conversations where I applied for a role. I got one call from a hiring manager about the role. We talked for, 5 minutes. And then he goes, I really think you're not a good fit. And it's like, okay, fine. Thanks for the call. Boom. So you hang up and you're done. Except for the fact that I've had a person call me back and say, I went ahead and created a different role. And I think you're a great fit for this role that I just made up because I think I like your background and I think I like working with you. So sometimes I think when you get what I call the form letter reject, that's one thing. But sometimes when you have I'll call it an in-person conversation with somebody who is hiring, it can be very, it's hard to predict in the sense how it'll turn out. It seems like, oh yeah, we'll talk about the role, my fit for the role, my background, and that's how it should move forward. It probably normally does. But I will say, like at Paramount, we were trying to hire contract, not permanent help for some projects. And I was frustrated with the HR staff not being able to find the right candidates. So I wrote my own job description and said, this is what I'm looking for. It's got to have these core skills, these preferred skills. And I told the HR team, I said, look, I do not want to see anybody and don't want to see any resumes unless they've covered the core skills. And having been on the other side of that coin with job descriptions, a lot of times I know companies don't always get those job descriptions right. So a lot of times people have been discouraged because they look at a core set of skills and it says, oh, they list Oracle, DB2, Postgres, MySQL, Mongo, CouchDB, Derby, every database on the planet. You go, well, I only have 4 of those, so I'm not going to apply because it said in the core skills you need these 9 databases. And it's like, no, usually the people that are writing those haven't got a clue what their team is actually working with in many cases. So the hard part, I think, for a candidate is trying to read through how good was the person writing the job description. So in some cases, and I'll say, and I'll let Michael go after that one, but at a bigger company, there's probably a more formal process to make sure the job description is properly written to identify, I'll call it core skills from nice to have skills or preferred skills. And that's a critical thing. So it's very hard if the job description isn't well written, because you'll either apply for something you shouldn't have or don't apply for something you should have. So I think that's a key, I'll call it gating factor for a lot of us. With that, I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, that's perfect, Jim. I appreciate that. And so I think what I'm going to kind of do is jump down to something I think that we should cover here, which is, what I heard from all of you was, you want to have a motivated team player that's prepared, understands the company they're going to work for, understand the role with the company, and the ability to collaborate. Well, one of the things I guess I'm going to touch base with, and I'll start with you, Jennifer, is, let's say that a candidate applies for a certain position, and let's say that they're, in general, a very qualified candidate, but the position that they applied to, as what Jim was talking about, may not be a perfect fit for them. But yet, Accenture has so many different roles in such a large organization. How would you handle somebody who's maybe coming in for, position A, whereas realistically they might be a perfect fit for position B, but position A really is not where they need to go?
Sure. And generally, when an applicant applies for a particular role, I may be, or somebody on my team may be working other roles with a different hiring manager for different titles, different experience. So it's really collaborating across the team. If you have somebody that is maybe not a fit for your role, or they may be a fit for another role, or even speaking with the hiring manager about, I interviewed this person, they're not a fit for this role. What do you think about another position or something that you may have coming up? So the conversation doesn't always end there, especially in looking at for good talent. Where else could they possibly fit within the organization?
The very best recruiters, and Jen is one of those. Their primary focus is always on networking. But one of their primary areas that they're focused on would always be networking and thinking more broadly and collaborating. Back to collaborating again, but networking is at the core of what a recruiter should be focused on. So it's great to hear that's the way that you're focused on it, Jen, where you're looking at candidates and you're thinking more broadly and you're thinking about, holistically from an organizational perspective, because we know we have so many different needs. That is the absolute right way to deal with it.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. And it sounds like it creates really a wealth of opportunity within a company like Accenture, where you have a very talented individual and say, okay, they come across through this job posting, but in reality, they're a great fit for another role. So, Jim, maybe you want to weigh in a little bit on that as far as, fit within an organization. I think you really touched on it from your own personal experience as far as, talking to a company and then they came back and said, well, you're really right for position B.
Yeah, so right, and I've had those kind of calls happen a few times, but primarily the reason that happened for me is just that you established an excellent relationship with maybe a hiring manager or whoever, or in some cases I've even had, and I'll pick on Accenture as an example. If somebody has a lot of roles to fill and you've applied for a job and they say, well, you're not a good fit for that job, but you're talking on somebody in a screening interview after you go through an analysis. And I've had this happen larger companies like that will say, wait a second, we have a functional analyst role that might be a better fit for your background. And so they'll give you the opportunity to sort of redirect and many times say, here's 3 other things I think you might be a good fit for, and they'll give you that opportunity to apply. The key thing is if you're talking to somebody in HR, they're going to be interested, among other things, are you qualified for the basics in the role, but they're also looking, and they understand very well, the team and the company fit. And so maybe I'll, again, pick on somebody like Accenture or Fidelity, some big companies, say, well, it's a very mature company, but in certain areas, like the blockchain space, maybe they operate differently in that team because it's not the same as the rest of the company. So again, the HR person is, I'll call it sort of a lighthouse or a gatekeeper going into an organization can help you understand what the different options are. And I honestly, looking at job descriptions, wherever they come from, whether somebody sends me one on LinkedIn or I go out to Indeed or wherever I find them, the reality is, even though they try to give you a little bit about the company and the team background, most of those things are generally not near enough guidance, I think. And if you are lucky enough to at least get to the point you're talking to somebody in HR, that's the chance where you as a candidate have a great opportunity to quickly share who you are, what you're interested in, and why you're interested in that company, that role, maybe that team as well. And they can give you, they're usually well prepared to give you a lot of feedback on that.
Mhm.
You know, and a couple of other quick points. The other thing you really want a recruiter should be doing is they should be very open to exploratory conversations with candidates. We do that quite often, where we're connecting with candidates, understanding their background, and seeing where they might be a match across our organization. The second point I wanted to mention is we've done a lot of work on our job descriptions. Jim, I know you were talking about job descriptions. They're not perfect yet, but what we've tried to do is simplify them, speak more to what the person will actually be doing. You'll notice in our postings, you know, it's who we are, you know, what you'll be doing, things like that. So it's very to the point. And then we've also tried to limit the number of basic qualifications and preferred skills, so we get it right down to what we're really looking for. It's helped to a degree, and we're still working on it, but it's in line with what you were talking about, Jim.
Yeah, great point, Michael. I think when you do that, what's really cool is you wind up getting, in a sense, a broader net of people coming at you. And then you as the recruiter representing the company or the team have a ton of flexibility in a sense, fielding all those different applicants coming in. And I would agree with you, your point about the job description. If it's just one of these comprehensive hit lists on everything there is in the world of data, as an example, you're going to discourage 75% of the people who are probably qualified, but go, I don't have 2 of these, so I'm not going to apply.
Right.
Okay, perfect. One of the things that was mentioned in the course of conversation was around networking. And so I know we were talking a lot about it within the context of within the recruitment space, but I just want to lean into it a little bit more since this is all about the candidate. And Michael or Jennifer, any recommendations that you have about networking that could benefit the candidate with getting in front of HR and eventually earning a role?
Yes, I have a few tips. So think, again, try to prepare, give a lot of thought as to the type of role and the type of company or companies that you would want to work for initially. And then when you're networking and trying to connect with those organizations, people within those organizations, it's a slow process towards connecting with first one person, with then 5 people that could become 15 people. It's all about making connections to open doors and to get to the right people, to have a conversation, a discussion, to explore opportunity. Opportunity for you as a candidate, and opportunity for the organization to hopefully, add your skills and experience. Jen, did you want to add to that?
Sure. And then anyone that you also may personally know that may be working in a particular space, or you're interested in what they're doing. People always like to talk and help people out. So it's always good to kind of make a list as well personal people you may know in a particular role to see how they may be able to help or introduce you to different people in the network for you.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, Jen,
And
that's a great point. I'll say,
go ahead, Jim.
I would guess a lot of us, myself included, have actually done mentoring like that, right? For different people, different groups and whatever. And you're trying to help people understand what the opportunities, how to prepare and all that. And so if you find somebody, as you said, who is already in the role that you're aiming at or in a team you're aiming at, it's really great if you can make those kind of contacts and get that feedback.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I would say, attending a forum like this is a great way to network and, see the different people who are in attendance and connect with recruiters from Accenture and Paramount. And then also Bobby's done a great job of posting in the chat here of a lot of the Hyperledger working groups and, attending those working groups and participating in the Hyperledger ecosystem is another great way to really network. I think a good question that came through on the chat from Justice was around, what do you recommend for a recent grad that would like to engage with a great company like Accenture? Because they're going to have, a limited network in the business space, and they see a lot of opportunities for senior roles, but I'm sure there's a host of opportunities for junior roles within Accenture. So Jennifer or Michael, you want to touch base on that?
Jen, you want me to go?
Sure.
Okay. We do focus much of our campus entry-level recruiting efforts at particular schools. That said, it's still about networking. So as an example, now you have two contacts at Accenture. You have Jen and I, right?
Yep.
So you should definitely connect with the two of us. And you can share your resume and we can get it in the hands of our campus entry-level team to consider it. If you've had excellent training in blockchain, as an example, we may be able to, share it with some of our leaders in that organization to think about, that could think about it from an entry-level perspective as well.
Perfect. Another thing I think that Bobby did a great job on is posting in here that there's Hyperledger mentorships. And Bobby did a great job recently with a mentorship at Hyperledger. And then also there's a number of hackathons that are hosted either by Hyperledger or other blockchain development companies. So definitely for a recent grad, getting involved with a hackathon is a good way to engage with the community as well. Jim, you have any other thoughts around networking or engagement there?
Yeah, so actually, I would say in my world, I've been on both ends of this thing. So I was, I'll call it somebody with no experience in many cases earlier on in my career, trying to move into roles. And it was challenging. And we didn't have as many opportunities then as we do now to get engaged. So when I think of engagement, if I look and say, okay, I'm interested in a space before I even go to Accenture and say, hey, whatever, I graduated top of my class, but I have no skills related to any of your jobs. You think about, how do I get engaged? So first of all, there's probably industries that you're interested in more than others. That's one area to focus on. The second thing is to saying, what kinds of roles am I interested in? What are those skill sets? And then back to Bobby's point, which I think is tremendous. There's a tremendous set of opportunities. And Michael said earlier, not just Accenture, but a lot of companies who are larger will actually do recruiting directly at schools and so on. And they'll actually have programs to bring in people and maybe give them basic training in an area. But if you don't fall into the category that you get one of those opportunities, then I'd encourage you to take a look at the kind of things Bobby was suggesting. And there's plenty of what I call free or low-cost training available today that didn't exist 10, 20 years ago. So if you want to be what I call self-trained on some of these technologies, it's either inexpensive or free in many cases to get some of that training so that you at least can move in to say, I want to be a blockchain project manager, I want this, and I have at least attended these courses. I know something about blockchain. Now you go to Accenture and say, I've done the research on the company. I know you do consulting in these areas and I have this kind of an interest. What's an opportunity for me? You've, in a sense, developed your skill set and background well enough to start saying, I have value to add because I've done some homework in a way to try to prepare myself for those roles. On the other hand, I would say, like anybody, there's people who have spent $250,000 on a college degree and have found that their skill sets, unfortunately, didn't line up with anything. I think I would, again, push back and look toward, especially larger companies, I'll say, that do have the ability to provide more guidance, whether they have recruiting exercises you can go to on campus or go to their website, ask questions there. Most of these companies, the bigger companies at least, I'll say, not little ones, but bigger ones, will probably have at least I'll call it a filtering system that lets you ask questions directly off the career site and say, hey, what about this? What if I don't have background? A lot of these, what I call automated HR systems, will at least give you some feedback and eventually help point you in the right direction of where you might be able to knock on a door, for sure. But it's not a simple process, honestly. I mean, I don't know Accenture well, but a lot of the companies, it is a lot of homework. You're going to be knocking on a lot of doors, getting a lot of feedback, and you'll improve your own preparation, and a lot of the other things that Bobby had mentioned earlier about what it takes to prepare to, in a sense, be better, qualified to go after certain roles, for sure. There is a lot of work in that. I'll tell you this, in my own career, and it was different earlier, but I'll say when I was out of work, looking for work, I put in more hours of work than when I was actually working for somebody. When I'm working for somebody, what you have to deliver is well defined. What your responsibilities are hopefully clear. If you're working with a manager and a team, you know what you have to deliver, what you have to do, and so on. But when you're not working, you're saying, oh my God, I've got so many potential things I could be working on. And you wind up, at least in my case, doing more work, not less. And that ignores the whole hiring process itself.
I would just add to that. I wouldn't view your years in school as just school. It's similar to even when you're working for an Accenture. If you were just focused on your primary role and you never thought about getting involved in other projects. So while the years that you're in school and preparing for your bachelor's and everything, pursuing your bachelor's, there are probably opportunities where you can get involved in some type of blockchain project or research at your university, some types of internships. It's all about finding things that you could highlight for a potential employer, or that could potentially stand out to an employer to get you in the door for that first opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to talk some more about Bobby being a mentor. And I think that there's a great opportunity if anyone who's attending this session wants to engage with Hyperledger. There's really a wealth of opportunity for graduates or students that are still in college to be able to get engaged with the blockchain community and develop their skill set. The other thing I'm going to just comment on here, it looks like Matt and Vic have been reaching out to people on chat, and that's really showing that the community is engaged and there's opportunities by networking here. So hats off to both of them. Next thing I want to jump into is really, Jim talked about, the level of effort that goes into applying for a job. And so really what I want to kind of highlight now is my second question, which is, what can a candidate do to prepare for a specific role? And is a cover letter important? LinkedIn profile? What things should a candidate have ready to go in a very, easy to read format for a recruiter? So I guess, Jennifer, I'm going to start with you.
Okay. I think in looking at resumes, you just can't have maybe one resume version. Really take the time to consider what you're applying for and tailor that resume for that particular position. But also keep it clear and concise with some of the major points of your experience, but also any accomplishments that you may have done in your career. So you don't have to have something really long and cumbersome, but something that's simple and clear targeted to the role that you're applying for with your experience and accomplishments.
Mhm. So I guess my follow on to that, Jennifer, are you looking for more of a functional resume, or what kind of length are you looking for? And really, what are the highlighted areas that you would suggest a candidate really put their effort?
Sure. So in terms of, a technology type or blockchain type position, there may be some technical requirements that are listed in the job description. So making sure that those, while it may be part functional, it may have some technical component to it in terms of maybe programming languages, courses you've done, certifications. So I would say it's, a bit of a blend, making sure that you've got your responsibilities covered, but also your technology skills as well.
Okay, perfect. Michael, your thoughts on the resume, or whatever LinkedIn profile updates
Sure.
or anything else you would recommend?
Yeah, well, I agree with all of Jen's points for sure. I think a resume should definitely not be longer than 2 pages, and I think even 2 pages tends to be too long. You may only have 2 minutes of the recruiter's time or the hiring manager's time that they're looking at this. You definitely want to be very clear and concise and detailing your experience in that way. I do think that the LinkedIn profile is important from a networking perspective, and I think all of the tips that Bobby shared earlier, so I won't just repeat them. I think they were very good tips. I don't think that the cover letter's important. However, I do think communication within email is very important.
Mhm.
That might be your first contact with an organization. You want to make sure that they see you as someone who's communicating in a very clear, concise, quick manner, where it's thought out, but it's clear and to the point. And they can quickly understand what you're trying to communicate. So I think that's more important than the cover letter.
Yeah, so basically on the follow-up to you or the initial outreach to you, just a very clear, concise, well-written, to the point email is really going to carry the day as far as on the recruiter side looking at that candidate.
Yes, and if you're messaging with them on LinkedIn as an example, the same thing applies. Very
Perfect.
clear, professional, and concise.
Perfect. Great point. Jim, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, two
communication?
things. I think Jennifer was dead on about the concept, and let's put it this way: I've made all the mistakes you can make as a candidate and trying to get hired. I'd say the reverse of it is I agree with her 1,000%, and Michael said it too about the cover letter being less important. The reality is there's a job description, and you hope it's well written. You hope it's properly targeted. If it is, I would follow her advice and say, yeah, the resume I'm going to push in is going to have to be really targeted to that job description with my skill sets, my interest, and my experience that's relevant to that. And so taking her idea, I've had the most success when I created what I call a resume factory. You are who you are. If you've been around 3 years or 30 years, it doesn't matter. You sort of have this inventory of who you are. You have to pull out of that inventory of who you are and what you've done and what your interests are, and then reformat it to what that job description is. And back to Michael's point, you'll then wind up with, I'll call it a clean, sharp, short resume that doesn't take a lot to absorb. And they'll quickly go through what I call the hit points and say, oh, here's the job description on the left. Here's this resume on the right. The hit points are good. I just did hire, we're not actively hiring, but for any career roles, but I did hire a contractor recently. And the key was the resume was 2 pages. As Michael said, it was clear on the first page. He hit the key items I was looking for very clearly. And so as a result, I said to the person in HR, just get this guy in. And they had a bunch of other resumes. I said, no, I don't even need to talk to those people from the resume. They're not close enough to what I need very clearly.
Sure.
And so they brought him in. We talked. He asked me after a 15-minute conversation, he goes, well, what's the next steps? I said, none, you're hired. You fit. But the key to it is, as Michael said, was the efficiency of that communication. He was efficient in the resume. He was, as Michael said, he was very clear and focused in the interview. And so I knew what we needed. And he, in a sense, brought that to the table, communicated very well. And it was not a complex process. We didn't need to extend it at all. It kept it simple.
Perfect. Yep. Makes sense, Jim. So on the flip side of that, we talked about, clear, concise, professional communication. Can you give me some pointers on what a candidate should avoid when communicating with HR, trying to get a new role? Anything that you've run across in your careers that really was a, thing to avoid and something you want to get across to the group here?
Oh, is that to me or Michael or
It's,
Jen?
well, you can go ahead, Jim. If you're
All right,
ready
I'll
to
be quick
go,
'cause I
then
don't have a lot to
I'll
say.
I'll let you start off with it. How's
I'll
that?
be fast. I'll say this. When I was at Delaware and I was an MBA student, the university was trying to promote us. We were the fellowship students that were coming out and graduating. So they created a book that they sent off to all these corporations of saying, put your resume in there. We're going to send it out to whatever it is, 100 corporations so they know about you, in effect. And coming out of Delaware with a master and an MBA, I wasn't going to see Accenture or IBM showing up, knocking on my campus to say, who's here for interviews. So they did that. They sent out the book. The guy next to me made one small mistake on his resume. He put together, I'll quote, a very bland, sort of boring resume, which in itself wasn't bad. But at the bottom, it says, what are your interests and hobbies? Which you don't have to put that into a resume, but he included that section. And at the bottom, he puts above all a Phillies fan. And it's like, you talked about information that's totally irrelevant. I mean, maybe Michael is a Phillies fan. Maybe that would have reached Michael, but I would say 99 out of 100, recruiters are just going to say, what? So the most important thing in this guy's life that he has to communicate is that he's a Phillies fan. Doesn't really go far. So there are things logically that you do not want to share. You want to really be focused more toward how do you want somebody to see you? What's important for them? And I think Bobby said this nicely before, is you want to say, put yourself in their shoes. What do they want to know about you? And if you're throwing stuff in there that's unrelated, you've got, I'll say that 1 in 20 chance of saying, gee, I like fishing too. And maybe there is something small there, but for the most part, all you're going to do is distract and slow up the process and probably reduce your shot at getting considered by throwing that kind of stuff in there.
Okay, perfect. Michael?
Jim, that was very well said, by the way. You made me laugh. And no, I'm not a Phillies fan. But see, I'm not sharing which team I like because it's not relevant to you.
That's right.
So you want to remain you should be very positive in these discussions, in these meetings.
Yep.
Things like politics should never come up in any discussion. It should be a very professional type of conversation, polite, hello, how are you?
Okay.
Make sure that you're staying focused, listening even more than you speak, which is always a good practice. Making sure that you hear the questions first and then give a clear, concise answer. So you don't want to be talking over the interviewer or answering a question that they didn't actually ask. That shows that you're not listening very well. Those are a few things. Jen, would you like to add to that as well?
Sure, and always remind yourself what you're applying for. Just kind of going back to the cover letter, I was looking through an application the other day and the cover letter was for some other role. It wasn't even for the position I was reviewing. So just always make sure you're making notes because it can be a lot to manage if you're talking to a lot of different companies. Just to ensure you understand what you're applying for at the current time and the discussion you're having at the current time.
Yeah, that attention to detail that Bobby was talking about, and be laser focused on the role and make sure that when you're submitting any content or communication regarding the role, it's spot on and only for that role. So great advice.
Yeah, I think I'd say Jen and Michael both made great points. When you're discussing and when you're having a conversation, it should be a conversation. And I don't know if I'll ask the two of them. I don't know if it's a trick you guys pull, but one of the coolest things is they'll say, okay, so here's this job. It's an architect for X, and you're applying for this. I got your app in front of me. I've got your resume. Now I've got you on the phone. And I'm asking you, so Jim, tell me about why you're interested in Accenture. Maybe that might be a starting question. You get a shot, as Michael said, to respond. The trick is you don't want to make that response a 20-minute response because you're not going to have that long, right? So he made the point, he's dead on. You got to think of, okay, I'm going to get asked, why do I care about the company? Why do I care about the role? Those are questions I know are going to come up in the interview. How do I get my answer to be focused and down to, I'll say less than 2 minutes to answer the question? I don't want to go over 2 minutes, like a secret boundary. What happens, and I've done this many times, is somebody like Michael will say, so Jim, tell me about yourself. Well, myself goes on for 1,000 years. I'm almost as old as the frickin' pyramids. So if I'm going through telling about myself, I've now burned out the entire interview, and Michael's going to say to me, well, it's been great talking to you. You're a wonderful guy, Jim, but now I've got 30 seconds left. Anything you want to say before we wrap up? And it's like, yeah, well, it was great talking to you. That's it. So I couldn't emphasize enough about the fact that you have to have a balanced conversation. So they're going to ask you, they want to ask you questions. They want you to answer stuff. They don't want you to go off on the history of what you care about. You know what I mean? And forgetting politics. If you care about the inside of computers, they're not going to want to know about that. They just want to know, maybe at a high level, what's passionate? What are you passionate about? What drives you? Why do you care about this? What value do you see yourself bringing to this company? But every one of those answers has to be short, and you have to push it back to them and say, is that the answer? Is that the answer you're looking for? But you have to move the conversation back to them. Is there anything else I can add to that, or is that enough? Something like that. You have to flip the ball back over the net and give them a chance to continue. And only because I've made that mistake enough times, I can speak to the value of what Michael gave you on that one.
Mhm. I want to kind of shift over to a couple of great questions in the chat here. So the one that came from Mark that I think is very relevant here is, as a recruiter, let's just say that the person submitted a nice, concise, functional resume with all the details you're looking for. But we all know that LinkedIn is really kind of your online CV. And if they have other details or jobs that are outside of what they really focused on for the resume that they've submitted, how is that viewed with a recruiting perspective?
I think that, Jen, you could speak to this as well, of course, but I think everything should line up. It shouldn't be two different stories that you're seeing. The resume should align with the actual background and experience of the person. And if I were to go look at the LinkedIn profile, there should be no difference there.
Perfect. And that's exactly the right answer that I thought you were going to put out there, Michael. So Jennifer, if you have anything different to add, feel free to do so.
I would definitely agree, because, if you maybe changed careers, you can explain that during a conversation, versus if something looks like it's missing, then that may cause more, questions or time to explain something when it could just be right there on paper.
Perfect. Okay.
Or online, I mean, not paper
yeah,
anymore.
right online. Yeah. And I agree with what Michael said, is everything needs to line up perfectly. So whether you're looking at a functional resume or their LinkedIn profile, it should all be one lineup. Then the other question we had was from Matt, and he was asking about, is it okay for them to ask what are competitive salaries when talking to a recruiter?
I think a better conversation is to just kind of talk about, have a discussion as to what your needs might be, your expectations. And then, and when you get to that point in the discussion, of course, when it's appropriate, it's certainly not at the beginning of the discussion. And it should be when I think towards the end of that discussion, if the recruiter is bringing that up. I know when I conduct screen interviews, oftentimes I'll touch on benefits, like high-level benefits, I'll share information later in more detail about our benefits, total rewards, and all of that. Oftentimes, the candidate would prefer not even having that discussion in that first call about compensation. Recruiters, for the most part, have a sense, a very strong sense as to whether or not the comp is eventually going to line up based upon the skills and experience of the candidate. Usually, we have more of a comp-related discussion once we get past our skills interview, and we know at that point that there's a little bit stronger interest. Then there's a follow-up discussion with the candidate to talk in a little bit more detail. The way that I approach it, and Jen, you could speak to this as well. I share with them how our compensation and total rewards are structured, which usually opens candidates up to talking a little bit more about their total compensation. And then at that point, we know if we're on the same page. So you don't want to, I think it's really important to make sure that recruiter organizations are hearing that you're mostly focused on the opportunity, the opportunity, the role, the career opportunity, as opposed to the compensation. Not that that's not important.
Perfect. Yeah, great advice. Yeah, they want to be excited about the work that they're going to be doing with a company like Accenture, and based on that, that's really going to drive the conversation forward. Yep.
I have a thought on that.
Sure.
I agree with what Michael just said very much. You're in trouble if the first thing you're asking is, what do I get paid? Not a good place to start. You're trying to figure out, given the job description, given what the opportunity is, why are you interested in actually doing the work, point one. And the other thing is, and what do you think you could add in value for what that is? Those are where that first conversation has to focus. And you either line up or you don't. When you ask about compensation, I don't have to ask Michael in that first conversation. All I have to say to him is, I read the job description. You've seen my resume. My question is, you could ask a different question. You could say, I'm trying to understand my fit for this job description. And the simple thing is, do you see this, Michael? Is it really a junior role? Is this a mid-level role or a senior role? That's all I have to say. I'm trying to line up me against the requirements that he understands for that job in that department. Now, what happens is, without bringing up numbers at all, I can go out to many other places on the web and find out what the ranges are for junior, mid, and senior. And I should already know that ahead of time for those roles. So when he says, Jim, it's really a mid-level project owner role, I'll say, okay, I know roughly what that is. I don't have to know exactly. I just know ballpark. I'm in this range. And either that is where I want to be and I can move forward in the process, or I'd say, no, that's way, I'm looking for a more senior role. I don't even have to talk about money. I just say, okay, you told me it's an entry-level project manager role, and I'm looking for a senior role. So I know we're not lined up on the compensation, and that's fine. And Michael probably would say to me, well, this isn't that role. I'd welcome you to apply for other ones that are maybe more senior.
That's exactly right, Jim.
Okay, perfect. Jennifer, any other thoughts around the compensation piece and when to bring it up, or how that's positioned from the candidate's perspective?
I think those were all very good points. Definitely showing the motivation for the role and being interested is more important up front, and the conversations around compensation can come later.
Perfect. I think another thing I want to highlight from the chat is also additional resources beyond just LinkedIn, and a lot of the developers, what their work is in GitHub or GitLab, or even, I'm looking at Hyperledger here, their activities within, pull requests or contributions to the Hyperledger ecosystem. So what are your thoughts around, as a recruiter, going and taking a look at some of the actual work that's out there on the public sites?
Sure, I think it's important. A lot do highlight those on their resume. Where those may come into play is more your next level interview with a member of the hiring team.
Perfect.
So it's good to have those referenced, or even during a discussion, maybe share what those are and invite them to go look.
Yeah, that's great, Jennifer. Michael, you have any other thoughts around, those additional technical resources where somebody can point to work that's on the public access portion of their work?
I think Jen was exactly right. A little bit on the resume, and definitely to highlight and share those examples when they're in the next interview with some of our business leaders.
Okay, perfect. All right. And then the other thing is, just from your perspective, and I know Jim really did a great job of saying, be prepared here, maybe only have a 2-minute response when, someone from Accenture HR asks a question. So do you have any kind of sample screening questions that the people attending the session might want to be prepared for?
Sure, I can, from my point of view as an initial conversation, it's generally around what they may know about Accenture. Why are they interested in Accenture? Why are you interested in this particular position? So those are some of the main questions I would focus on during an initial screen, along with their background and experience.
Perfect.
Maybe also a little, give some thought as to how this role leads into the next 3 to 5 years of your experience, of your career going forward. Like, have you thought going forward how this aligns with that, the goals that you have for your career progression?
Yeah, that's a great point, Michael. Career progression is, yeah, you're going to be entering Accenture at this level in this role. But as you talked about earlier, that's not going to be your entire career at Accenture. And so where does a candidate see themselves going in that 3 to 5 year time frame? Yep, perfect.
In the final interview of our process, we usually have one of our managing directors speak with each of the candidates. And that's one of the things that they're looking for.
Great.
It's one of the things that we're looking for from our candidates, that they've thought through that.
Perfect. Jim, any other thoughts around that career development idea that Michael talked about there?
Absolutely, because I've been on the other end of that. So I've been the hiring manager in smaller companies in the IT space as like the equivalent of a CIO for, I'll call it a small conglomerate, nothing on the size of Accenture. And when you go to a place like Accenture, they're so well organized. I'll say, maybe I'm on them unfairly, but I'll say companies are, to be fair, not just Accenture. They have a really well-organized process for everything. And what that means is you come into that process exactly like Michael said. The goal is you come in there and it's a big company with lots of opportunities. So you're coming into this one team, into one job maybe that you're targeted for. But these big companies have so many options to move around that you can have that nice discussion easily with either somebody in HR or, as he says, a managing director or director that you're working for. Usually the easy way is if you're talking to a hiring manager and you've gotten that far in the process, you can just say, hey, one question I have is, tell me about your journey here at Accenture. How did that work out? And you might even look at somebody like me and say, well, you're really old. So you've been other places. Tell me about, how did you arrive at where you arrived at? And that'll give you the idea. They can easily paint the landscape. And I've just talked to a company today where I heard the manager of data operations started as a data entry clerk 1 million years ago. But what happened was the company kept growing just like Accenture does. And the opportunities were all over the place. So he keep realizing companies, right? Divisions get put together, they build new divisions, there was tons of opportunity. When I was managing IT for smaller companies, I didn't have that. I knew that. I'd already worked at IBM, so I knew, in a sense, how big that landscape was. But what I did in my interviews is I would talk to a candidate and say, look, here's the deal. I'm not IBM. I'm not, Accenture. I'm not Google. I'm not somebody like that. I'm a small IT shop. So what I would say is when you're hiring in, and you're looking at the role, between you and I, we should be able to share enough information honestly on both parts that you should look at the role and say, you know what, I'm positive I've done my due diligence and this role is going to fit what I want to do for the next at least 2 to 3 years. And I would turn around the other way and say, as a hiring manager, if I don't see you staying in the role for 2 to 3 years that I'm hiring you for, then one or both of us has failed the process. And so I said, we both need to be comfortable with the thing that happened. The first larger place I worked as an IT director, I wound up, I can't remember how many people I hired, but I'll say there were like 24 people I hired into this one group. And out of the 24 people, one retired, one enjoyed life enough that they didn't want to have a career promotion. They were just saying, I don't want to do anything else. But the other 22 out of 24 all got promoted, graduated from the company to become directors somewhere else. And that was one of the coolest things I put on a check mark for me, is saying, hey, I felt great about the fact that I was able to help these people graduate from, I'll call it, it wasn't Gemmy University, but it was, I'll call company university. And just like colleges have alumni, the way I looked at them is I told them, I said, if things go well, even if I don't have the right opportunity for you here, I will help you find the right opportunity elsewhere. That's the process I want to have. And that alumni concept actually worked out great as an example in companies that do it well. So if you're not Accenture, go to a company, but still ask the same thing. Talk about a career path. They should still have a good answer for you, even if they're not Accenture.
Perfect. Yeah, great insight, Jim. So the other one I want to look at is, let's just say they have a great experience, Jennifer and Michael, going through the process with you, and you see that they're a qualified candidate and you're ready to now pass them along to the hiring manager or line manager for follow-up interviews. So maybe can you give our attendees a little bit of insight as to how that process works and what they're going to be looking for? Jennifer, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, sure. Michael touched on it a little bit, where generally the process after having a meeting with the recruiters, you would go to a skills interview with a member of the hiring team, and having a successful interview during that process, then you would move more to a manager director type interview, where you have a chance to meet with a leader, more senior leader of the team, and really not only talk about your background and experience, but also have a chance to talk about the culture, what you may be looking for in the future, and have more in-depth conversation with a leader in that group that would be more different than kind of more of a technical interview you may have had before. So it may be a little more broad in terms of what you may be looking for in the future, but also a chance for you to ask questions of a senior member of the team within that organization about Accenture, assessing culture, assessing fit for you, just as much as Accenture is looking at fit for Accenture.
Perfect. Michael, you have any additional thoughts about kind of the hiring manager interview process?
No, I think Jen described our process very well. And I think it's a process that seems to work pretty well for us, where the candidate gets an opportunity to speak to their experience throughout the process, to learn more about our organization, to share why they're a match for Accenture. And Accenture also has an opportunity to share with the candidate why this is the right place to develop their career further. Like that last interview with one of our managing directors, it's mostly focused on, as Jen was sharing, is this the right match? Let me tell you about, is this the right culture, the right environment, what you're looking for, all of that. I think we found it to be a pretty good process. So.
Yeah, perfect. And I've got a follow-on for the Accenture team here, which really comes from the chat. And so kind of two questions here. Jennifer, I'm going to start with you. Is any suggestion for someone re-entering the workforce after many years? And then also, is there an Accenture alumni recruitment process? It looks like there's Charles here that is an Accenture alumni. So maybe talk about, kind of re-entry into the workforce.
With that question, I think in terms of your resume and presentation or in talking with a recruiter, just be prepared to explain what you're looking for, and what experience you have within your experience that's a fit for this particular role. So I think in having that dialogue, sharing why you're looking for this particular position and why you're a fit.
Okay, perfect. Any other thoughts, Michael, around re-entering or alumni?
I'll mention the alumni point in just a second, if I could.
Sure.
And I think Jen answered the other question, I think, which was right on, which was perfect answer. So I wanted to mention another part of our process, and I think that this is important to know. As we're going, each interviewer in the process plays a part in that they get back to the recruiter on, okay, this is where I think the candidate is from a level perspective, experience perspective, and throughout, and then at each of those steps through our process, our recruiters are checking, rechecking, setting, resetting expectations with the candidate, making sure there is alignment so that we don't get to the end of the process and all of a sudden there's a mismatch between, the candidate's skills and experience, what they're looking for, and what the role is. So there's a constant back and forth as we go through that process. That's another piece to it. About alumni, so we love when alumni come back to Accenture. We know that you've experienced our environment and our culture and everything, and it's, there are a number of candidate types like referrals and alumni and diverse candidates that that are absolute priorities for us as we look at candidates. Alumni, we love when they come back to Accenture. We have an entire recruiting team that focuses on that. If you reach out to me on LinkedIn, I'm not sure who asked the question, but
Charles asked the question. Yep.
Okay. If you reach out to me on LinkedIn with that question, I'll get you more details, like a link and maybe a contact within our alumni team that could hopefully help you.
Perfect. Okay, let me see if there's any other. Another question that was posed to me directly was, are there any specific certifications that you're looking at as far as, I know both of you come from the blockchain recruitment team. Is there any specific certifications that are more valuable from a recruiting standpoint if you're looking at a technical candidate that you would want to see on their resume? And Jim, I'll also open it up to you too, but go ahead, Jennifer. Go ahead and go first.
Michael, are you gonna?
Yeah.
Okay, Michael, go for it. You have a great answer. Let's hear your great answer.
I don't know if it's a great answer, actually. It's probably going to be pretty vague, unfortunately. I think the business. Okay, so in the years that I've been focused on our blockchain recruiting, I haven't heard a significant focus on certifications. I'd like to make that a follow-up question that I could maybe share with the group that you can keep in mind. If we could communicate it in some way, I'll take that as a follow-up item to check with our business.
Okay, that'd be wonderful. Yeah. So anybody who is concerned about that, I think it was Nigel had reached out to me about that.
Mm-hmm.
So feel free to reach out to Michael directly on LinkedIn and follow up on that question if you'd like.
Yeah, I do have a thought on that, on the certifications piece.
Sure.
Certain roles have, I'll call it, well-known industry certifications. As an example, I have a project management certification, but mine is not a PMP, right? So mine, which comes from the PMI Institute. So there's a difference sometimes in certifications in terms of how well they're recognized. So people who don't know, I've actually had to tell a recruiter, they'll say, oh, you have a PMP. I said, no. I have a project management certification from a different organization where that's a well-known certification. And so I'll honestly say, no, it's more like the equivalent of an associate's degree as opposed to a bachelor's, right? So there are differences in more mature disciplines. Blockchain isn't like that. And as a result, it's disappointing in some ways that we don't have better quality certifications. They're honestly all over the map. So anybody can create a certification, and the quality of those varies all over the place. The
Sure.
best I think it can say about you is you made the effort to go get certified in something in blockchain. If I had a certification on Solidity, it's not going to be enough for a team looking for a Solidity developer to say, well, then you're the guy. That'll have a small influence. What would really matter, and I think there was somebody made the point in the chat, is when I'm interviewing with the people who are, in a sense, looking at my skill sets specifically in the interview process, I'm going to have to convince them that I meet the needs they're looking for that role, for sure. And part of that, as an example, might be saying, well, I can tell the story about me working on the giving chain. I'm pretending here, Bobby, just go with me, right? So I can say I worked on the giving chain, and I was the guy that put together Firefly and some other pieces and integrated them all, with DB2 or something crazy. And I can talk to that kind of thing that might be very relevant to the job I'm going into, might be very useful. The fact that I was certified as a Hyperledger Fabric developer and Aries developer shows interest on my end and effort, which is good. But unless they actually know what that certification's worth and what the test is, it's not going to mean a lot, as much as me talking directly to the experience that's relevant for what they're looking for with the right people.
It's good to see you were paying attention, Jim.
I didn't.
Everyone always pays attention to you, Bobby. You do great work. So here's a good, interesting question from Claudia, kind of talking more in the networking vein here again. So she says that she was coached to find people that work for the company already to see about maybe setting up an informal interview and engaging with the process that way, and wanted to see if that would be a recommendation that you would have. So Jennifer, I guess I'll ask that question, if this person knew someone in Accenture, how would that work compared to just going right into HR?
Well, if it's strictly networking, then it's really more about making a contact and maybe having a conversation about what that particular person does. If it's a role that somebody is hiring for, it just probably would end up getting routed our direction anyway, just to go through the application process. But if it's more just strictly networking, I think making contacts within an organization in a role that you're interested in, just to see if they are open to be a networker or be a mentor to you, I think is a great idea.
Okay, Michael, any other thoughts around, knowing an existing person within Accenture, and then, talking to them and seeing if it might be a good fit for an interview and going through the HR process then?
I think that's exactly what you should be doing. That is networking.
Hmm.
That's expected. And then, it could, more than likely, it would probably lead to, that person referring you to the recruiting team potentially. So yes, that's what networking is all about. Any context that you know within the organization, that's the way to do it.
Okay, perfect. Jim, any other thoughts from your perspective as far as knowing internal resources and then, leveraging that as far as being able to interview for a position?
I have to just agree with what Jen and Michael both said, that it absolutely is the best thing. The only maybe caution I would say is if let's pretend I'm going back to IBM or going to a new company, Google, and I've never worked there, and John worked there. I know John's an alumni of Google. So I go to John and I'll say, hey, I'm thinking about an architect role at Google in their machine learning department. I'm interested in that area. I've had some experience, and they seem to have a lot of jobs. Can you give me some feedback on what you think about working in that space at Google? John, if he has that experience, is going to start sharing things with me. The thing I need to ask John is, can you tell me about what you think about working for Google? In a sense, he's painting a picture with a set of paints on his experience as well. He's probably not going to take an independent view like a recruiter would of here's the opportunity, here's the good, the bad, whatever. It's probably a more personalized one, which is really valuable in many ways. But I do have to be careful. If John didn't have a great experience and he left Google and then moved on to something else, maybe he's a lawyer now or whatever he does, the answer is I have to understand how John sees Google, not just the feedback I'm getting about maybe that opportunity. So sometimes, I'll say every company has people that left happy and people that left unhappy. And honestly, I can tell you, there are companies I could pick in my own history that you wouldn't want to ask me about, or at least I'd be more careful about giving you feedback on them because I didn't have a good experience with those companies. And you have to say, and even though I try to be less biased, I'll say, well, I didn't have a great experience, but that really had more to do with the manager than it had to do with the quality of the company. The company might be a great company. I just didn't have a good experience with the manager I was working with. So you do have to try to understand a little bit about that context for what it's worth.
Yep.
Agreed.
Okay, perfect. The other question I want to go to now is really about the offer process. So let's just say that we have a candidate that came in, they passed the initial HR screening process. The hiring manager is now interested in bringing them onto the team. So maybe can you walk us through how that offer process works? And I'm going to go back to Jennifer, and maybe you can touch base and tell us how that works at Accenture.
Sure. So after going through the interview process successfully and understanding that a hiring manager has a candidate they want to make a hire, then generally having a follow-up conversation with the candidate in terms of their interest in the role, what they may be looking for, what their requirements may be, and then really based on the experience and how the Accenture team has suggested leveling the candidate in terms of experience, and we would come up with a competitive offer to present to the candidate. Generally, we go through that verbally and get a verbal accept, and then provide a written offer to them after that verbal acceptance.
Okay. And then once the candidate accepts the offer, then how would that onboarding process work? And maybe Michael, you can talk a little bit more about the onboarding process once the offer is accepted by the candidate.
Sure. So then the next step in our process, we normally initiate a background check. We have an additional team we refer to as our career launch team that helps us in the onboarding of our new joiners, of our new employees. And that process usually takes quite a few weeks. All of our candidates have to give notice and all of that. So when they're going through the background check, there might be non-competes or non-disclosure agreements that we're reviewing and checking on and things like that. And we're also making sure that they're fully enabled in our system so that it's a really good experience when they start with Accenture.
Sure.
And there's when they do, there's a wealth of information that goes out where we're connecting them to what we refer to as a people lead, or it's kind of like a career counselor or the manager within Accenture. The person in most cases, it's the person that they report to here at Accenture, and that will be directly focused on their development and within Accenture and their career. And then the first 2.5 days here at Accenture are spent in what we call a new joiner orientation. We have a very large organization, so there's a lot to learn about us and how to kind of navigate all that. So that helps. And then during those first 2.5 days, all of our employees start on a Wednesday, and it's like Wednesday through the middle of the day on Friday. Usually their talent, their people lead, their direct report, and their HR person will probably reach out to them and start talking about different projects that they may be considering them for, and just beginning to assimilate them into our organization.
Perfect. Yeah. Sounds like a wonderful process, and really getting them prepared to get engaged with the company and build their career for sure. Jim, you have any other points about the
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
offer process?
My big point on this one,
Sure.
I definitely need to send Michael my resume. No, the funny part is the process he went through is good. And I've been in other larger organizations. And to be fair, every large organization has aspirations about getting right what Michael just talked about. But it's not simple, honestly. And one company is very different than another in the process and how well they're able to achieve those kind of goals. But the concept of saying you're partnered up, I'll say probably most likely at Accenture, I'm guessing, but there's I'll call it this, I'll call it beginning group of new hires, and you're probably participating in that track. But at the same time, he said they are assigning you a career guidance counselor, which is a pretty cool idea. Most companies are also going to give you somebody right off the team that says, I'm joining this architecture team for enterprise architecture, and I'm going to buddy you up with Jen, who is going to be the first person I want you to talk to. She's a senior architect on that team, and she'll help provide you some feedback, guidance, kind of a thing. So you wind up getting somebody like Jen, who is really your work buddy initially, to give you some guidance. Then you, in his case, you also have a guidance counselor to ask a lot of other questions that are not related to the specific stuff you're working on. And the third thing is you're in a pool with usually staff, a variety of a mix of both HR and maybe some line stuff, trying to give you feedback. And I'll ask this of Michael and Jen, but I'll say big companies usually do a more thorough job than the companies I've been in. You get the offer, you like working with me, so you're excited by that. You might have met my manager and you had a good interview with him. That's all good stuff. Usually big companies are going to go a little farther in trying to get you to understand the culture you're moving into. And so they'll say, hey, here's all these other resources. We want you to go through this checklist and spend some time up front. So you can say, ooh, I understand more about the company, where it came from, what's valuable to them, how they work with people. There's so many other things. So smaller companies will say, hey, you got to talk to Jim, you got to talk to Jim's manager, and hopefully you got all the right questions answered. But in these other larger companies, they really work hard, I'll call it lately anyway. I can't say they did that 30 years ago, but certainly today, they work very hard to give you a much better picture of, in a sense, where the company's come from, where it's headed, and what the value systems, what the culture is. Try to answer all those kind of questions. And then again, you have your guidance counselor, you probably have your team buddy, if you will, who's taking care of you as well. So there's, I'll make this up and say, it doesn't look like there's as much confusion starting out in a more organized process like that.
Okay, perfect. I think the only other question that was on my list that we really didn't touch base on was, let's just say you have a very solid candidate and they passed the HR screening just as a good quality candidate, but ultimately they just weren't a good fit for the role with the hiring manager. So how would you, what would you recommend to a candidate to respond where they ultimately weren't selected as the final candidate to move forward, yet they were still a very good candidate as far as the perspective of, their hireability at Accenture? So go ahead, Michael. Yep.
Well, I just think it's very important to keep perspective. So it's an ongoing discussion. I mean, great if it leads to an opportunity, but even if it doesn't lead to an opportunity that time, it may lead to one in the future. So try to maintain perspective and professionalism and continue the discussion with that recruiter. Make sure you leave off where you're staying in touch with one another, and you express your continued interest in Accenture as an example, and that you'd like to continue the discussion. I think that's the best approach.
Yeah, I think that's exceptional advice, Michael. I agree with you 100% on that. Jennifer, any other thoughts on how to follow on if you're ultimately not the final candidate for the position?
I always share to remain positive, even though you may not have been selected. You had the opportunity to go through the process, and it's a learning experience and something that you could take and build on. But just remain positive because, as Michael said, it could lead to something else in the future for you.
Perfect. Great advice. Jim, anything you want to add to that as far as follow-up if you're not actually selected for the final role that you first applied for?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I think, and I don't know, I'd like Jen and Michael to jump in on this one, but I think there's different types of responses companies will give you when you're not selected. If I've had, I've gotten past the HR call, I've gone through some interviews, so I was considered a viable candidate, not just by HR, but I had several interviews for this role, and then eventually I didn't get the role. Okay, so they did find they liked you better than me. That's fine. They picked the best candidate they could find. But I knew they at least had enough interest in me to go through these interviews. And maybe I thought the interviews went fairly well, let's say. At that point, I think I've earned enough, I'll call it, to go back to Jen or Michael and say, hey, tell me, I really like the company. Obviously, I wasn't selected for the senior architect role I was hoping for, but I really like Accenture. Does it make sense for me to continue for some other roles? Did you have any thoughts on what might be appropriate to me? I wouldn't have a problem calling either one of them up or reaching out on LinkedIn or whatever. Say that was my recruiter. So on the other hand, I'll say the tough thing is, and I'll say again, I'm not being fair to all small companies, but on average, a lot of little companies don't always have that luxury, and they'll just send you a form letter. And actually, to be fair, it's okay if Accenture sends me a form letter too and said, hey, we were looking for a first-class baker and we don't think anything on your resume lines up, but we wish you the best of luck. I expect to get that because I didn't line up at all. I never even got through the interviewing process. But if you, and little companies, a lot of times aren't as good on the follow-up, I'll say. So a lot of times you will go through the interviewing process and all you're going to get is a delay and no response after maybe the last interview. And then 3 weeks later, when they figure out they've, the other guy has already started, you get the form letter kicking back saying, hey, Jim, it was great knowing you. We wish you the best of your career. And that's all you're going to get. But again, if you had, I'll call it a deep interview process, and you had what you thought were good relationships with the people you went through, I would certainly encourage you to go back to talk to the HR person, or at least reach out to them in an email. If not, just say, hey, look, you really like the company, like the process and all that. And think of them more as a quarterback. They have the opportunity to tell you, well, you know what, if you weren't the best as a senior architect over here, but you really had a strong background in programming, they do have plenty of those roles. They can redirect you in effect to other opportunities.
Perfect. Yeah, great insight from everyone today. I really appreciate it. I don't think that we have any other specific questions from the chat, but what I'd like to do now is to turn it back over to Bobby, and Bobby's really done a great job of dealing with all the different questions coming through chat and posting a lot about the resources at Hyperledger. So Bobby, if you can come off and get on video here and take the session back over, that'd be great.
Sure. I just want to thank everybody. That was so insightful. And I hope it helped people who are looking for jobs, make connections. Feel free to reach out to any of us. The BC Employee website will have links to this recording as well as the PowerPoint to get the live links and some of the events that are going on. Please join us for the December 2nd event where Accenture will have tables for different positions so that you'll be more fine-tuned to where you want to go. We're not really sure how they're going to divvy up those tables, whether it's by project or by role or whatever, but they'll let us know how they feel they want candidates to come in. So please come with your questions for these companies about the jobs you want. This is a really informal, call it a free interview pass. So you get to talk to the companies and they get to talk to you, and it's very informal. And then you know if you want to move forward with them. So please join us for that event. Again, the recording for this event will be on the BC Employee website. We are almost out of time, so I'm just going to ask if anybody in the audience has any questions for the panel. Now's, you've got 5 minutes to ask them, so go right ahead if you have any.
Bobby, I think the one thing that was asked was if they could get the LinkedIn profile links for Jennifer, Michael, and Jim. That'd be helpful.
Sure, I'll add them to the summary on the webpage. So when I put the recording up there, I'll put their links if you haven't grabbed them out of the chat, and if they want to drop them in the chat now. Again, and don't hesitate to go on all your social media and talk about how great this event is for clarifying your job search. We would appreciate the coverage. So any questions? If not, we do have the Learning Materials Working Group called. John and I co-host that. And if you're interested in learning about the Hyperledger community at all, that is like the call to join, because we take newcomers through, we teach you how to navigate the wiki page, we talk about what opportunities you can jump on, and we teach you how to do that. So again, join us for the job fair with Accenture on December 2nd, and I hope to see you at the Learning Materials Working Group. The information is on the Hyperledger wiki page, which is wiki.hyperledger.org. And you can find all the information there. So thank you, John, Jim, and thank you, Michael. And this was an exciting event. And Jennifer, we're awesome. Thank you for everything. And we'll see everyone on the 2nd.
Thank you for inviting us. It was great.
Thank you very much.
Have a wonderful evening, everyone. I'm going to wrap the call up now.
Thank you.
Bye.